Remember back in 2016 when Trump became president by winning the Electoral College but lost the popular vote? Anti-Trumpers weren't so happy about that, and it kind of sparked a renewed interest in the age-old debate about the Electoral College. Wait, did I just say age-old debate? Yeah, I did, because this is something our founding fathers were actually arguing about when they wrote the Constitution. Crazy, right? With the new presidential election coming up, there's a lot of chatter about the value of the Electoral College. So today, we're gonna get into it. Should we get rid of the Electoral College? Okay, so for a quick primer on the Electoral College, let me put on my professor glasses and cardigan.
Thank you so much. Slide this on right here.
Yeah, there we go. Now youth, the Electoral College is not an actual college where you go to study. It's a process. It's how we vote for our president here in America. When you go and cast your vote, you're not really voting for the president. You're actually voting for electors who then go and vote for the president. Now, we've created a fancy animation to help explain the numbers to you. Animation, please. Perfect. There are a total of 538 electors. Each state and DC gets at least 3. And then the rest are based on the state's population size determined every 10 years by the US Census. Here's what the 2020 electoral map looks like. So, California gets the most with 55, then Texas at 38, then Florida and New York at 29, and then you've got some small states like Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas that get 3 each. And you need 270 electoral votes to win the presidency. Look at that, everybody. We all just learned something together. Please stay in school, guys. Please and thank you. Then the general election happens. In most states, it's winner takes all. This means that the party that wins the state's popular vote sends all of their electors to cast votes to elect the president. So if a Democratic candidate won the popular vote in California, then all 55 electoral votes go towards that candidate. But there are 2 states, Nebraska and Maine, who divide up their electoral votes based on who won the popular vote in each congressional district. So at this point, you might be thinking, who are these electors? Can I be one? Well, they're usually chosen by each presidential candidate's political party and are often higher-ups, like big-time Democrats or Republicans. Bill Clinton was an elector for the Democratic Party in New York for the 2016 election. They just can't currently be in office. So since I'm not rubbing shoulders with any of these people, I probably won't be an elector anytime soon. Darn. Okay, so that's the Electoral College in a nutshell, but why do we have it? Well, way back when the United States was becoming the United States, the founding fathers met in Philadelphia at the Constitutional Convention in 1787 to figure out the major laws for how this whole government was going to run. And out of that came the Constitution. As with most things in politics, there was a lot of fighting, and one of the most hotly contested topics was how we elect our president. I mean, when our founding fathers were hashing this all out, they didn't really have any good examples for this type of thing. They were basically just trying to avoid being an oppressive, corrupt monarchy. So, on the one hand, you had the Federalists, who thought Congress should elect the president. And then on the other, you had those who thought the president should be elected by popular vote. But both were a little problematic. First, if Congress elected the president, then Congress would have way too much power and things could get corrupt real fast. But if it was left up purely to popular vote, then there was fear about what could happen, considering there was a lot of people that couldn't read, write, and were just generally uneducated. I mean, if you think Wi-Fi is bad now, imagine getting your news from somebody on a horse. So the Electoral College was their big compromise. The idea here was that electors were a lot more informed about the issue than most citizens, and therefore could protect our best interests if we accidentally voted for a crazy person. Of course, back when the framers were thinking about the best interests of the country, they weren't thinking about people like me. They were really only concerned about the best interest of property-owning white men. Literally the exact opposite of your host here. So that's who they allowed to vote. But when they had to decide how many electoral votes each state got, they had a little problem. Slavery. Well, okay, that's literally not a little problem at all. It's actually a really big problem that was really messed up. But you see, if they counted slaves in their population counts when divvying up electoral votes, then the South would get way too much representation. So that's how the old 3/5 compromise came about, where slaves were counted as 3/5 of a person. Let me say that again. Slaves, they were people actually, were counted as 3/5 of a whole human being. But okay, back to the present day, where women, people of color, and poor people can all vote. Well, I mean, we still have voter suppression, which is happening all over the place, but that's another story for another day. Good old democracy. Gotta love it, right? There are a lot of people that argue that it's time to abolish the old Electoral College. It's outdated and doesn't accurately represent the voice of the people. I mean, there's been 5 times in history where the dude who became president lost the popular vote. 2 in the last 20 years. Plus, aren't we all a little more informed now? Do we really need electors anymore? It's the reason why people say votes in more populated states count less. Like, check the math here. California gets 55 electoral votes for 37.3 million people. That's about 1 elector per 680,000 people. And then our friends in Wyoming get 3 votes for 568,000 people, or 1 vote per about 189,000. So you can see why people say a vote in Wyoming counts more than a vote in California. And keep in mind, 1 in 8 people that live in the US live in California. So that's probably why it takes me 2 hours to go 20 minutes to get home. People also argue that the Electoral College gives way too much power to people who live in swing states. Now, these are states where either candidate has a chance at winning the vote. See, in recent decades, some states are pretty much guaranteed to go with a certain political party. Like California and Massachusetts almost always vote Democrat, whereas Republicans can count on winning Texas and South Carolina. But states like Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina can swing either way. That's why we call them swing states. So candidates often focus on trying to appeal to these voters the most. And then there's the argument that the Electoral College makes it harder for third-party candidates to win. I mean, think about it. In order to win any electoral votes, with the exception of Maine and Nebraska, you have to win over the popular vote of a whole state. In 1992, Ross Perot ran for president as a third-party candidate. Now, that was probably a little bit before y'all's time, and quite frankly, mine too, but he was a pretty big deal. He ended up being one of the most successful third-party candidates, winning 19% of the popular vote, but he didn't get a single electoral vote. If we didn't have the Electoral College, it'd be a lot easier for third-party candidates to challenge the two-party system. Okay, so you might be thinking, I'm sold, let's get rid of this Electoral College thing. What's the problem? Well, for starters, if you just pay attention to popular votes, then the presidential candidates will pretty much just ignore rural America and the smaller states and the issues that matter to them. They'd only need to campaign in the big cities. Not to mention, abolishing the Electoral College will be insanely hard to do. It would require a constitutional amendment. That means a 2/3 majority in Congress and 3/4 state approval. When's the last time people in Washington agreed on anything that much? So to get around this fork in the road, some states have signed on to something called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. That is a very, very long name. This is basically a pact where states pass a law that says their electors have to vote according to the outcome of the national popular vote. But it only happens when enough states have signed it to make it to 270 votes. So far, 15 states and DC have passed it, so we're up to 196 electoral votes. And most people aren't holding their breath that we'll get to 270 anytime soon. Since most Republicans have benefited from this system over the last 20 years, states that lean red aren't too excited to join. And even if it does hit 270, the constitutionality of this thing will likely be challenged in court for years. A third option is that states split their electoral votes, kind of like how Nebraska and Maine do it. How it works in those states is that whoever wins the state's overall popular vote gets 2 electors, and then the popular winner of each congressional district gets 1 electoral vote. But according to an analysis by Fair Vote, this method would mean it's more likely someone will win the presidency without winning the popular vote. So for example, back in 2012, if we counted votes this way, Mitt Romney would have been our president even though he had 5 million fewer votes than Barack Obama. So, America. We find ourselves in quite the pickle. This conundrum brings up some big philosophical questions about what it means for America to be a democracy. How do we balance whose voice is heard in a huge diverse country like ours? Is it a problem that sometimes we elect presidents who lose the popular vote? Do you think the Electoral College is working how it's intended? Or is it time for a change?